Defence Secretary of the United Kingdom is on his way to jail. He must now face charges under the Official Secrets Act, having betrayed our country's national security in plain sight, didn't have the guts to own up to it, forced the Prime Minister to hold an official inquiry which has found that our Defence Secretary leaked secrets from a meeting of the National Security Council, and the Prime Minister has sent him a letter ordering him to demit office as she no longer has any confidence in him. So I have an idea. A prisoner swap. Let's open the gates of Belmarsh Prison, let Julian Assange out, and bang Gavin Williamson in the cell of Julian demits. Julian was, of course, a more honourable prisoner than Private Pike could ever be. After all, Private Pike leaked our secrets for personal advancement. And one could say, insofar as the wages of sin of being Prime Minister are greater than the Defence Secretary, for personal enrichment. Julian Assange told the truth to us, not for personal interest, not for personal enrichment, but for our enrichment, our interests. Julian Assange told the truth to us, for us, and he accrued no conceivable advantage in so doing. Indeed, he has suffered mightily, bearing that cross of being a truth teller down all these years of incarceration, and I would argue torture, at the hands of the besieging British government and their American masters. Julian Assange bears the scars of being a truth teller. I have the privilege, as several do on this platform, of describing Julian Assange as my friend. I knew him when he was young and fresh and healthy and vibrant. And I have to tell you, when I saw him dragged out of that embassy, as Greg Sharkey said, in the manner befitting of a war criminal, I wept bitter tears for what had become of Julian Assange. And I met a lady today, she may be here, in a shopping mall in southwest London. An ordinary woman, not political at all, wasn't even sure if I was me. She told me that she had watched what I'd said outside the grim prison walls of Belmarsh, and that she too had cried, and that she thought of Julian Assange every day. The ladies here, God bless you and thank you for coming. That she thought of Julian Assange every day. That's the impact of what has happened in the hearts of ordinary people who just know that there's something wrong here. The man that told the truth about the war crimes is in prison the men that carried out the war crimes are counting their millions that they have made out of those crimes. It's just not right, is it? It's just not right. That lady knew that it's just not right. Dare I say it's just not British. It's not fair. It's not just. And we demand that the British government cease and desist from their efforts to send Julian Assange to the torture chambers of the United States injustice system, because that's what they are planning to do. There's many a slip, twixt cup and lip, and there's more than one breaking story. Let me tell you that in the last hour, it has been announced that there will be a parliamentary by-election in the Peterborough constituency, triggered by a recall petition. And so I can announce to you, you're the first to know, I will be a candidate in that by-election. We have assembled here a fine panel of speakers. I will come back to the microphone in introducing them. I may add a few words here and there, but they can speak for themselves. Greg, you've taken my list. Our first speaker needs little introduction, at least if you listen to my radio show. She is a hero herself. She's someone from within the deep state itself. She's someone who was charged with our national security. And by the way, if she'd done what Gavin Williamson had done, she'd already be in jail these past years. But she has never done that. She left the security services because she believes in our national security and not in its prostitution for other people's national interests. She's a whistleblower, like Julian Assange, although within the law. And you'll see her on our Sputnik show on RT on Saturday. Please welcome the wonderful Annie Macken.
Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, George. And thank you to all of you for coming tonight. It's an amazing turnout in support of someone who has displayed exemplary vision and exemplary courage in furthering freedom around the world, and that is Julian Assange. What I want to talk about tonight is my experience, partly of working with WikiLeaks with Julian, but also of the bigger picture in terms of what he's facing, what will happen, what is the definition, the legalities, and all that sort of stuff. So my background is indeed MI5. I was an intelligence officer way back in the early 1990s for 6 years, before resigning with my former partner and my colleague, a man called David Shaler, who became quite a notorious whistleblower in the late 1990s. And we ended up paying a very high price, he particularly. We ended up going on the run literally around Europe in the late 1990s. We had to live in hiding for a year in and we had to live in exile in France for another 2 years. And he went to prison twice for exposing the crimes of the spies. We're not talking about official secrets here. We are talking about unofficial secrets when the spies break the law. And they can do it very easily because there is no meaningful oversight over what our intelligence agencies do. Do not believe the government when they say there is not. Because even the government doesn't know, the spies can lie to them too. So David went to prison twice for exposing crimes, up to and including an illegal assassination attempt against Colonel Gaddafi of Libya back in 1996, where MI6, our James Bond wing of British intelligence, funded a known branch of Al-Qaeda to illegally assassinate a foreign head of state. You can't get much more illegal than that. And the attack manifestly went wrong because Gaddafi survived to be assassinated in 2011 by precisely the same characters, funded by precisely the same intelligence agencies. But innocent people died in the 1996 attack, and David reported that, and David went to prison. In fact, David ended up not only in prison in Paris when the British government failed to extradite him for a breach of the Official Secrets Act in 1998, he also ended up in Belmarsh prison in 2002, which is precisely where Julian Assange is currently languishing. And it is a terrifying prison. That is where all the high security prisoners go. That's where the AAA category terrorist prisoners go. And David told me he survived by telling his fellow prisoners that he'd been taught how to kill people with his bare hands. That's how he survived there. It is violent, it is terrifying. And that's where Julian is currently languishing. The other point I want to make as well from those whistleblowing years is that David took proof from MI5 to establish his bona fides, to say, here are the documents establishing what I'm discussing. And he gave them to the newspaper in 1997 in order to stand up the stories that they broke. Now, of course, this is pre-widespread internet, and it's like going back to the Jurassic era. And the newspaper insisted on keeping the copies of the documents. And then, of course, once the story broke, the Metropolitan Police went crashing in to the newspaper and demanded the documents back out of the newspaper's safe. So David lost all proof of what he was trying to establish in the public interest. So fast forward about a decade. Come 2009, I'm floating around in various tech hacktivist geek circles across Europe, and I end up in a big Dutch hacktivist festival called Ha. Not Baha, Ha. And someone pointed out to me a man called Julian Assange and said, he's really interesting. He's recently set up an organisation called WikiLeaks, which you might think is important. And when they explained what the point was, where whistleblowers and leakers could send information secretly to an organisation called WikiLeaks, where that information would be stored, where the whistleblower didn't necessarily have to immediately identify themselves and face the full pushback from the state, where that they could prove what they were saying. I thought this is a really interesting concept, and the fact that Julian Assange came from the cypherpunk movement, where there was a movement from the 1990s, and he had a really good technical nous to protect any source that wanted to donate information to him. I thought this is a wonderful mechanism. I wish it had existed back in the 1990s when David and I were trying to blow the whistle about MI5. So I met Julian at that event, and I stayed vaguely in contact with him over the years. And I have nothing but appreciation and awe for his courage in what he has done, not only to expose so much crucial information, not just about the American government, but about corporations and governments and war crimes around the planet over the last decade. I have nothing but admiration for what he personally has put up with when it was manifestly obvious back in 2011 or 12, whenever it was, when this threat about, rape allegations in Sweden came up, when he had been warned there would be some CIA sting operation against him, when he knew what the case would be against him, he still went ahead and his staff as well, let's not forget them, still went ahead and continued to publish information that is very much in the public interest. I would like to say as well very clearly that that system has never failed. No source has ever been identified because of a technical failure. This is the coverage, this is the protection that Julian Assange, with his vision for WikiLeaks, has provided to whistleblowers around the world. Now, why do I think this is important? Because of my background, and because I can't help trying to organise and help people, I've been involved with a number of other organisations over the years, whistleblower organisations, and most notably organisations like the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity in America and the Sam Adams Associates for Integrity and Intelligence, who give an award every year to those who indeed display integrity and intelligence. And awards have gone to, of course, Julian, and of course people like Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, Thomas Drake, Bill Binney, Craig Murray, former ambassador of the UK, who exposed torture and got vilified for it. Many, many, many key whistleblowers have been honoured and supported by these groups. And we put out a memorandum to the UK government and to the US government only yesterday, saying that not only is what they are doing to Julian Assange going to have a chilling effect on the media, of course we know that, and I'm sure many of my fellow speakers are going to be speaking to that, but also that it is a chilling effect to future whistleblowers as well. And I want to be very clear about this. Julian Assange is not a whistleblower. He is a publisher, a high-tech publisher, a new model publisher, who has broken the old mould of the old legacy media. And I think that goes partly to explain why the old legacy media has attacked him over the last few years too. They see him and this new model as a threat. And I have to say, whatever happens to Julian, I really hope the worst doesn't happen to Julian. The new model is out there, the genie is out of the bottle. The old media cannot put that genie back in the bottle, and the governments cannot control it either. So let's hope for more whistleblowers. Having said that, just to update on what the legal situation is in this country, we are now facing a position where advice has been drawn up by the Law Commission for the government to consolidate, as they call it, the official secrecy laws in the UK. So at the moment, if you are an intelligence whistleblower, you face 2 years in prison. If you are a journalist covering and breaking the news of the story provided by that intelligence whistleblower, you potentially face 2 years in prison. If you are republishing something that is already in the public domain, you are legally allowed to do so. That comes out of the Peter Wright spy-catching ruling from back in the 1980s. What the Law Commission is now proposing to the government is to consolidate and tighten up our secrecy laws in this country. And what they are proposing is that whistleblowers coming out of the intelligence agency, the military and central government will now face 14 years in prison with no legal defence. Journalists reporting this information will now face 14 years with only no damage defence. And the prior publication of information will no longer be a defence under law if you reprint something. Now this is appalling because the 14 years in prison is something that traitors face when they betray their country, not whistleblowers and not journalists. So the pushback, even in this country, is appalling. And the pusillanimous attitude taken by our government in not protecting someone like Julian Assange, who is a publisher, is appalling. The craven attitude of our mainstream media in this country, who are not laying out the facts about what Julian has achieved, is bloody appalling. And that's what we're facing at the moment. I speak a lot. For obvious reasons, I have been very concerned about my personal privacy being snooped on, because I am the gamekeeper indeed turned poacher. I know what the spies can do to follow you. So I've been speaking out about privacy and about whistleblowing for many, many years now. What I see now very clearly is a ghastly confluence of the corporate and the state. Now, if I was a psychiatrist, I'd be aware of something they call the dark triad, which is the worst possible combination of psychiatric, sociopathic aspects in one human being. And in fact, they confluence very well in James Bond, if you're interested. The first one being Machiavellianism. the second one being narcissism, and the third one being psychopathy. It's a nasty combination. What I would say is what we're looking at the moment in what's going on in terms of our internet freedoms, I also would describe as the dark triad. So we're looking at three forces of darkness coming down to clamp down and prevent the future development of our internet freedoms. First of all, we're seeing the corporate side of things, be it big social media, watching everything we do, be it copyright laws, intellectual property right laws, which we're seeing being pushed further and further even within the EU legislation recently. So that's the business side of things. Of course, there is a crackdown on hackers, criminals, if you want to call them, or hacktivists, as many of us like to call them. And also, of course, there's what the spies do, which has been laid bare in all its gory detail ever since Edward Snowden went public, with a whole slew of information coming out about precisely how complicit the corporations were, and also how much the spies are doing to us and how they can frame people. What we've also seen as well, and I would recommend if you're not familiar with this, is a WikiLeaks disclosure a couple of years ago called Vault 7. And this was very interesting because it showed that the CIA had developed tools to make it look as if something were hacked, then it could be made to appear as if it were hacked by the Russian government or by the Chinese government. There are specific programs along these lines. So we have a situation now where what on earth can we believe on the internet? We are told there is fake news everywhere. We are told there are laws being put in place to crunch down on fake news, but those laws are being used to crunch down on freedom of expression as well. And indeed, just one final point, what we're looking at with what is happening to Julian Assange, a high-tech publisher being crushed by these ridiculous charges and faced with God knows what in the US if he is extradited. And we only have one charge. We know that there's been a secret grand jury convened for years, pulling together all sorts of other charges, potentially under the Espionage Act. What we're looking at is the very fulcrum that will kill our freedom on the internet. All of us, not just for publishers, not just for journalists. If it disappear any of us, we will lose our freedom of expression. So the key final point here is the irony. Do you remember during the whole Russiagate hysteria post-Trump election, we had a situation where there was something called the Dirty Dossier, pulled together by a former MI6 intelligence officer, Christopher Steele. Now, that turned out to be a bunch of rubbish. But he was sued in an American court by three of the Russian oligarchs he had traduced in this dirty dossier. And the judge in that case said very clearly in his final judgment, his final ruling at the end of that case, Christopher Steele, even though he is British, even though he is resident in Britain, is deserving of First Amendment rights under the US Constitution, which means the right to freedom of expression, because what he did was in the public good. And yet now we see the point where someone like Julian Assange, an Australian living in Britain, is already explicitly denied, apparently, his right to the First Amendment, his right to freedom of expression, if he goes to the States. How is that justice? Well, we know there's no justice in this is a political act. But there are so many dark, swirling circles under what appears to be a fairly simple case of extradition. And all I can say is, if we do not stand up for WikiLeaks, if we do not stand up for Julian Assange, a man who was a visionary, a man who has displayed exemplary courage and exemplary fortitude over the last few years, we do not deserve to live in a democracy. We need to fight and we need to support him, otherwise we will all lose our freedoms. Thank you very much.
Privilege, unexpected, to be able to welcome as the next speaker, the head of WikiLeaks. Christian, welcome to the meeting.
My mind is full of anger, actually, after today's sentencing that you all heard of. It was a great shock to be in court today and observing a judge basically dismissing every mitigating and strong evidence in support of Julian Assange. The judge who obviously had pre-written the decision before she had heard the counter-argument, it was quite obvious, and then giving Julian Assange, well, de facto the maximum sentence of a year in prison, minus 2 weeks. This is absurd. This is no justice. This is a vindictive and a political decision. And my God, there's a question going through my mind. Will we ever have any justice? Will Julian Assange have any justice in the tough fight that we have ahead of us, which is fighting the extradition to the United States, where we all know what awaits him? Life imprisonment, possible death sentence for the crime of publishing truthful information, for doing journalism. It's an outrage. And I'm still angry, and I'm sorry if I'm expressing it in too strong terms, but it is. Are we seeing a total breakdown in every norms? Are we seeing a total dismissal of justice on every front, not just national, but also international? I was observing the judge today mocking the United Nations and the finding by a respected tribunal, basically a United Nations court, who found in Julian Assange's favor. He was mocking the finding and saying that it was all based on misunderstanding, and it doesn't even touch upon us. We don't have to abide by that. It doesn't really matter what the United Nations say. And the judge was echoing the words of the former foreign secretary of this country, who said exactly the same. So the United Kingdom government and the judiciary here has decided that the United Nations do not matter. You can dismiss it when it is not ruling in your favor, when it doesn't suit your political objective. At the same time, the judges and the political leadership in this country are saying, well, nobody is above the law. Julian Assange is not above the law. But who is claiming to be above international law and consensus about core values? It is the government of its country and the judiciary here. Will Julian Assange have any justice facing the extradition request by the US government in the court in this country? I doubt it, but we will fight on. We will not give up, because it's a fight about fundamental principles. It's mostly ignored by the media and the mainstream media as well, which is alarming. For the first time today, I sensed in the eyes of the many journalists I talked to, maybe an inkling of what it actually meant to them. Their security, their future, their jobs, if this extradition would be allowed to go ahead. I think they are slowly getting it. And it's about time. I was just reviewing, I had to stop on my way here to read over an interview that was passed to me and with a German weekly, where I was asked, is Julian Assange a journalist or an activist? I said, is that a question? I mean, if you're an activist fighting for transparency, for accountability, for truth, that is that activism? Well, I call it journalism. I was raised on that principle. So there's no difference in my mind. Somehow, in this distorted world that we have been led into, there's a distinction here. So what does journalists journalism mean today to people who ask questions of that nature? Well, it's obviously not being critical to power, to hold them accountable. And I was reflecting today as well, many people were asking me, what can we do? I was actually lacking words. I would probably be better to take advice from you. I've been in the mainstream media for 20 years. I've been with WikiLeaks for 10 years. It's my career. I've been trying to be a dedicated, honest journalist. And the values have never changed. But I'm feeling that we're coming to a juncture where things actually are breaking down totally. All the norms, everything we believe in the democratic principles. When Julian Assange the other day was awarded the Daphne Garcia Award by the European Parliament, one of the members of the panel said that the extradition demand by the US is extraterritorial power, the REITs, which are taken for granted. You mentioned that. It's absurd. He said this is an attack on European democracy, our principles in this sense. And it has to be fought. What can we do? Can we trust the politicians? Can we trust the judiciary? Can we trust the mainstream media? No. You tell me. I told people it's time probably to mobilize, to take to the streets. Today is my 18th birthday of my daughter, my younger child. What kind of, and I feel ashamed that I've sort of been trying for 30 years as a journalist to fight for some principles. What kind of world am I delivering to my children? I feel ashamed that I'm delivering to my children a world in a much worse place than it was. Even decades ago, even in Nixon era. It's absurd. Daniel Ellsberg once told me, the person who leaked the Pentagon Papers in 1971, he said, my God, if I had been doing this today under the secret courts, the grand juries, this fists of power crashing down everywhere, I would not see a day outside prison. I would have spent the rest of my days in prison. So we're worse off today than we were in the early 70s in the Nixon era. That is pretty chilling. That is bad. I wish I could leave with a positive note. The only thing that I can tell you is that we will not give up. WikiLeaks will not perish. We will get Assange free. I was asked by the same journalist, will WikiLeaks be alive in 10 years? I said, well, my mother was born in 1941. At that time, there was a British Empire, whereas the sun never set. It has diminished quite a bit. So empires have a tendency to exponentially actually diminish in power these days. We have now one empire residing with extraterritorial reach all over the world. In 10 years, we'll know about the empire. And I will put my bet on WikiLeaks and the ideals that WikiLeaks stand for to be alive in 10 years. That's for sure.
It's true, Christian, that Britain once had an empire so vast that upon it the sun never set. But that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. We wish your daughter a very happy 18th birthday. we're sorry that we have taken her father away from the celebration for the purposes of this meeting, but I feel sure that she will understand. It's true that we are not what we were. Some of us are old enough to be able to say that world in action is no more. That Panorama is a parody of its former self. That Channel 4 News is a parody of its former self. Some of us are even old enough to remember when The Guardian was a liberal, progressive newspaper. Now, it is a sewer of disinformation. And so many other things. I have no idea how any self-respecting journalist remaining on The Guardian can possibly justify its metamorphosis from a butterfly back into a slug. Our next speaker is a redoubtable activist for Julian Assange, day after day, week after week, outside that embassy. What's that embassy going to do now? Who's going to go there anymore? But it was once the center of our universe. Please welcome Emmy Butlin.
What am I doing here? I mean, I'm one of you, should be sitting there. They've invited me because myself and others, who a lot of them are recognised in the audience, I'm very glad to see, have been, for the last several years, been holding a solidarity vigil outside the Ecuadorian embassy, where we have witnessed indirectly the ordeal of Julian Assange and the struggle of WikiLeaks up close. We have witnessed the police operation, the surveillance operation out there over the years, the money wasted, and we've seen a very young organisation, an outstanding man, never giving up, and resisting and resisting and inspiring us day after day to return and stand there in solidarity, because we were inspired by him. Our work continues. The fact that he has left the embassy doesn't mean that we stop our work in his support. I've received tremendous encouragement by the public over the years. We've been standing there speaking to the passers-by, informing them of the latest, and overwhelmingly the British public and international public have been in support of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. And it was not surprising for me to again and again get confirmation of my own beliefs in people's own words, stopping by to get an update. You wouldn't know reading the local newspaper or the national newspaper, but overwhelmingly people have inherently understood that WikiLeaks is a good thing, and they inherently understand that the troubles that Julian Assange finds himself and WikiLeaks as an organisation is a direct effect of imperialism. We're here today, we're talking about imperialism on trial. But what is this all about? It's about information as a resource. Information that WikiLeaks has released for free to the public, for the public good. And other powers, greater powers, imperialistic powers, are trying to control. To control as a resource in the same way they try to control oil, in the same way they try to control precious metals, etc. Information is very powerful. Information gives you the opportunity to act with knowledge, playing level field in the international political arena, but also personally in everyday lives. People understand that inherently. It's a battle for knowledge. And people who stop with us over the years will firstly say, he's in there because of the United States. We know. Now we've moved on, obviously. The Ecuadorian embassy is no longer the pole that brought us together. But over the years, a great number of us have realized that by working together, we can definitely do the best that we can. Standing alone is not as effective. So my appeal today, standing here as one of you, is to please join us and mobilize. There is an awful lot of things we can do, each and every one of us, just like we've been doing over the years. I've got a notebook with Charlotte and a piece of paper, and please be so kind as to jot down your email addresses. We'll put you on our email list and join our actions. What are actions? Very simply, solidarity. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the Westminster Magistrates Court, when the first hearing for the US extradition takes place, we're going to be there with posters, with banners, with flyers, and we're going to chant, and we're going to flood the public gallery. Respectfully I say, because this is an important legal battle, we don't want to interfere with it, but make our voice heard. There are groups and scores of journalists. There will be a huge number of microphones, just like this one where I'm talking at the moment. Let's step up to the microphone, you and I and everyone else that is joining us, and make our voices heard. We're the public, we matter. We don't have to wait for 5 years or next time we have election in order to make how we feel on this very, very important battle. No, we can do it tomorrow. The microphones will be set. Let's be the protagonists in this story, the public. At the same time, there are other ways of helping. There are other ways of expressing yourself. If you don't feel or you're unable to attend our meetings, please write to your Member of Parliament. They need to understand how you feel. This is a major political issue. It's not a legal issue. It's a political issue, as very well the previous speakers have set out. We, the public, need to alert our Members of Parliament of our opinions. And this is the limitations of our democracy, but whatever tool we have available, let's use it and write our Members of Parliament, make this an election issue. George Galloway, very exciting news tonight about making this an electoral issue for him. Let's ask our Members of Parliament to do the same. Even if they disagree, even if you know that, oh, there's not a chance, try to let your opinions know. Again and again and again and again. The hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who stood by the Solidarity Vigil outside the Ecuadorian embassy and expressed themselves, if every single one of them had written a letter to the Member of Parliament, you'd have thousands upon thousands of people knocking at doors. Now is the time. And I welcome you all to join our action, and let's make a difference for Julian Assange for WikiLeaks, because, you know, there's an inspiring group of people, and they're working for us. And if Julian Assange was looking after number one, he wouldn't be where he's at the moment. He has sacrificed absolutely everything. The least we can do, since we are so excited about his publications, is to support him in these difficult times. So I would like to stop here and thank you very much for coming, and please keep writing and circulating that list with your emails. So thank you very much.
Let me reminds us that the title of this meeting is Imperialism on Trial, and in so doing she reminded me of something. I shall spill their blushes. Someone said to me back in 2002 in the Stop the War Coalition, in the great fight to stop our rulers from committing the disaster that they did commit in invading and occupying Iraq, someone asked me, can you stop using the word imperialism? It's so old-fashioned. It's so 19th century. Well, anyone watching the news over the last few days from Venezuela knows that imperialism is still alive and kicking. But it's not unbeatable. The Americans don't do coups like they used to. The masses in Venezuela and the honorable, loyal, and patriotic armed forces have stopped John Bolton, Elliot Abrams, and Donald Trump in their tracks on the streets of It's alive and kicking and dangerous, but it's not unbeatable. Not at all unbeatable. And neither is this fight on which we are now entered and truly engaged over yet. The next speaker is another whistleblower from inside the machine. He could have had a comfortable retirement. He might have been knighted. He might even have ended up in the House of Lords. He certainly would have ended up on the comfortable dinner party circuit of the establishment, for he was, after all, one of Her Majesty's esteemed ambassadors. But he chose instead to stand up against the lies, the disinformation, the terrorism, the regime change operation mounted by, amongst others, our own government, of which he was once a part. Please welcome His Excellency, Peter Ford.
Thank you very much, George, for that warm introduction. Very hard for me to live up to your kind words, but better get to the point. Thank you all for being here this evening. I know we're all very concerned about Julian, but with our concern, we must keep in mind at the same time the cause or causes for which Julian has been suffering, and that cause is the struggle against imperialism. As George has rightly said, that term imperialism, it sounds anachronistic, but you have to call the beast by its name. Yes. That is partly with modus operandi. They try to act under the radar. They don't like people to call the empire by its name. And what we're seeing at the moment is a wounded beast, an empire which is striking back, but the forces of the people have not had the last word yet. That is why we're here tonight. Looking back to 2010, that avalanche of leaks from WikiLeaks, that rocked the foundations of imperialism, really rocked the foundations, the sheer scale of the revelations and the immensity of the atrocities that were revealed, particularly about the behavior of US forces in Iraq, torture, the indiscriminate killings. Well, ordinary people's opinion and imaginations were grabbed by these leaks. So the empire really was being rocked on its foundation. forget that it was partly because of that groundswell of genuinely popular opposition to war, unnecessary war, that helped to bring Donald Trump to power. Was he not, as candidate Trump, the guy who was going to bring the troops home, going to end the never-ending wars? Wasn't that the platform? The platform that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks had helped create and paved the way for that groundswell of opinion on which Trump rose to power. The Judas that Trump, this pathetic man who is now the plaything of the warmongers, who once he got into power, forgot all his previous declarations, invited into the House of Power the warmongers, the John Boltons, the Mike Pompeos, the deep state, the physical manifestations of the deep state of the permanent military security government, which really governs America, and arguably this country and France as well. He brought these people into his house and let himself be led by the nose by them. Partly let himself be led into worsening relations with Russia. This was another irony, because the candidate Trump had argued for having good relations with Russia, but he's presided over an administration which has seen relations go to their worst point in many, many years. And it's ironic that while Russia itself has been moving away from communist, very dogmatic, doctrine-driven, authoritarian approach, America has been moving closer to that model. Don't think that America doesn't have an equivalent to communism, it doesn't have an ism. It does, and that is imperialism, or by its scholarly name, American exceptionalism. This is the term used by scholars, and it's not a term of opprobrium, it's boasted about by many Americans. They see America as the beacon on the hill, the country created with God's help, the hand of providence, bringing supreme values to the rest of humanity, with their 700 military bases and their immense bullying economic power to impose sanctions on dozens and dozens of poorer, weaker countries. That is American exceptionalism at work. And here's the thing, the believers in this creed believe in it more than Russians, or very few Russians actually believed in communism. Because Americans imbibe this with the mother's milk, that America was born to lead. And doesn't it get under your skin when people refer to the President of the United States as the leader of the free world? I mean, we must be grateful to Trump because he has embodied the stupidity of this and shown us how weak and feeble we are for even accepting the concept that the President of the United States. We must give him a warm welcome when he comes to London. I'm sure we'll have some events to mark that august event. Syria has been at the receiving end of much of this American imperialism of recent years. It's as though the Iraq War never happened. We're hearing the same similar lies about use of weapons of mass destruction in Syria's case, alleged use of chemical weapons shown by independent experts to be fake. I don't need to go into detail about that now, but the Americans have made a bad situation worse in Syria. Not content with having spoiled Iraq and helped to generate the beginnings of ISIS, which then spread to Syria. No, they had to make the situation in Syria worse by putting their own troops in northern Syria and now refusing to withdraw them. Trump, in a rare moment of lucidity back in December, announced out of the blue that he was going to withdraw the troops. Cue the most awful caterwauling on the part of the establishment. The minions of the deep state leapt into action in this country as well, and in newspapers like The Guardian. And incidentally, doesn't that typify the immense move to the right of elites worldwide since, actually, 2010, and since the Iraq War? Who would have imagined in 2010 that the Americans would start, or be instrumental in starting, another 3 wars in the Middle East, plus Venezuela, Syria, Yemen, and virtual war with Iran already, plus now Venezuela kicking off. No, the empire has struck back powerfully, and I greatly fear now what is possibly going to happen with Iran. America is effectively at war with Iran, and they're blatant about it. The economic warfare of sanctions is designed to bring Iran to its knees. And America will not take yes for an answer. The independent international watchdog on nuclear weapons have crawled over Iran and given them a clean bill of health. They've been respecting the Iran nuclear agreement that was concluded by Obama. But the Americans will not take yes for an answer. They want regime change in Iran. And we must be very vigilant and do what we can to keep our own government from being dragged into yet another unnecessary conflict. I'll conclude on that note. I just want to express my own hopes that tomorrow the judges will be aware of opinion in this country. I'm not overly hopeful, but in 2010, Julian and WikiLeaks team helped to kick off something very, very important. They rocked the foundations of imperialism. The counterattack has been underway for several years and is now coming to a climax. That's why it's so important that we be here tonight and make our voices heard. Thank you.
His Excellency Peter Ford mentioned a rare moment of lucidity on the part of President Trump. I felt I witnessed its reverse on Twitter last night, where President Trump makes most of his most important announcements. In the wake of the failure of his coup in Venezuela, he threatened Cuba with economic sanctions. No one appears to have told the leader of the free world that Cuba has been under total US sanctions for 60 years. And that President Eisenhower was in the White House when they were in proposed. And Cuba will still be standing when President Trump is a distant, if hilarious, memory. Now, many rogues have come out of Oxford. I don't need to list them, up to and including Tony Blair. But some of the finest people in England come out of Oxford too, and none finer than our next speaker, a novelist, a chronicler, a writer, a journalist, and yes, an activist, the one and only Neil Clark.
I'm a peace envoy. All the countries I get involved in end up being broken up into pieces. I'm come here tonight. First of all, congratulations to my friend George Galloway, who's announcing he's standing in Peterborough. That's the good news. The bad news is I'm going to be standing there too. Yeah, imperialism. Greg Sharpie, he invited me tonight because he wanted, imperialism on trial. He wanted somebody to put the case for imperialism. Right. So happy to do this. I even arranged with him a cut from my usual speaking fee to just £250,000 tonight. It'll be a big round later on. Imperialism. What's not to like? You go into countries, okay? You topple them, the leaders, you get puppet leaders in place. The first thing they do is they take a big loan out from the IMF or bank, and then you go in and you take the assets of the country. I see this liberation, what we do. So we're liberating the people of those countries from their assets. That's what we do, and we do it because it's about exploitation. It's about exploiting the people. I mean, it's about exploiting the country's resources, and we can do that better. What's the point of having a Yugoslav national oil company or an Iraqi national company? Much better off if the likes of Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, are running the show, isn't it? Much better off. And George is here. George, I'll put it to you bluntly. Okay? If George Galloway had been British Prime Minister in 2003, we wouldn't have gone into Iraq. Can you imagine if we hadn't done that? Can you imagine where we'd be today? I'd tell you where we'd be today. Saddam Hussein was still be there in his palace with his weapons of mass destruction, which could be assembled and launched within 45 minutes, threatening the entire world. That's where we would be today if people like George Galloway had been the Prime Minister instead of me. He wouldn't have gone into Libya, he wouldn't have gone into Afghanistan. Just think what the world would be like if we hadn't done those things. How unsafe it would be. We have, terrorist groups putting bombs everywhere around the world. Thank goodness we avoided that. And so imperialism, I don't like to use that word. I prefer humanitarian interventionism. Because that's really what we like to do. We like to intervene for humanitarian reasons. We intervened in Yugoslavia. We dropped a lot of depleted uranium on the country. It's purely humanitarian what we did there. Same as in Iraq, it was humanitarian. Afghanistan, these are all good humanitarian ventures. And that brings us to Julian Assange. I really don't get Julian Assange. I really don't get why we feel so, people here tonight express support. He's been exposing war crimes. Okay? Why do you want to do that for? Because if you expose war crimes against Britain, America, and our allies, you're going to make it harder as to do these liberations and these humanitarian interventions. So he's getting in the way of operations like the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, making it more difficult for people like me and David Cameron and Theresa May, these great leaders, to take us to war. So I think Julian Assange, I think he should be, I think, really, it's really bad what he's doing. I've been in Waitrose, I go to Waitrose, and we've got a huge fan, but, I'm hoping he'll come along to the Peterborough Waitrose, we can talk about how we can lock Brexit together there, and all the rest of it. What have I got in Waitrose? I'll show you. These are very fair. These are Waitrose, these are okay. WikiLeaks are not okay. Not damaging my ability to wage war, take us to wars. So stick with these leaks and ignore that WikiLeaks stuff. It's going to make it much harder for us to go to war. Imperialism or humanitarian interventionism has really got us to where we are today. Hasn't it? It's got us to where we are today. Just think back 20, 30 years ago, before we had these humanitarian wars, just think how dangerous the world was, how, terrorism everywhere, and, okay, in Iraq, we didn't, WMDs, we didn't get them. We weren't to know that Saddam had moved them to Iran. We weren't to know that. And I think confronting Iran at the moment and its weapons of mass destruction is, it's got to be done. You can say do nothing about Iraq. You can say let's do nothing about Iraq. Well, you can say about Iraq. So, I think we need to forget about WikiLeaks and to concentrate on, more regime change wars, more interventions, because clearly this is the way to go. We've got to liberate these countries like Iran, like Cuba, like Venezuela. Venezuela. Venezuela, we've got to liberate Venezuela from its oil, from its resources, get it under the control of Western, people like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, fantastic people who will do absolute best for the Venezuelan people to improve their living standards. So that's what we've got to be doing, I think, more of. So really, I don't think Julian Assange is somebody we should be spending too much time on, because, he makes it more difficult for people like me to operate. And George is going to be standing in Peterborough on a free Julian Assange platform. I'm going to be the opposite. I'm going to be making the case for, cramping down these kind of people who are inhibiting, trying to hinder these humanitarian interventions. So, if you're far from Peterborough, vote for me, and not for this chap, because this chap wouldn't have had any of these wars. So how can we possibly want to vote for someone like him? So thank you very much. So that's our friend Tony. Getting a little bit serious now. I think it is the case, as George said earlier, in fact, and that there's something wrong. Whether you're left, right, in the middle, whatever, there has to be something wrong when you've got the people who planned and orchestrated these terrible wars, illegal wars, from Yugoslavia onwards, who are free, made lots of money, incredible lots of money, they're free, and the guy who published information which we had a right to know about these wars and other things is in jail. That cannot be right. Yeah. Whether you're a socialist, a leftist, liberal, whatever you call it, you just know it's wrong. And that is the key point. Now, Julian Assange, I wrote an article about him called Julian Assange and the Tale of Tobermory. I don't know if anybody's read this story. Tobermory, from one of my favourite writers, H.H. Munro, otherwise known as Saki, a wonderful Edwardian comic writer who was bang on the money, and his books are so relevant today. Tobermory was a cat that a guest at one of these stately homes or posh houses taught to speak, and Tobermory was telling the guests that all the ladies about the secrets that he'd heard about the cook and the people in the kitchen, servants, etc. And as you could hear, everything they were saying, and he was telling all the secrets downstairs and about the other guests, and they thought it was hilarious. This is wonderful, Tobermory. And then Tobermory started talking about them, about what they'd said about each other, and revealing their secrets. They weren't so happy about that. A day later, Tobermory's dead body was found in the gorse bushes. Tomcat had taken it up as a story. He didn't live very long. And I sincerely hope that's not what's going to happen to Julian Assange, because everybody loves whistleblowers when they're revealing secrets of other people we don't like, but when they start, or when they publish information that puts us in bad stead about war crimes in Iraq and elsewhere, then they are pariahs. Just think how Julian Assange was fated in about 2009, 10, 11. Not just The Guardian was fawning over him and publishing his stuff, but he even won a prize from the Index on Censorship. He was fated, everybody wanted to be with him, but then the stuff started coming out about Western war crimes, and all of a sudden, he's a appalling man. He's got, he's a narcissist, he's a sociopath, you name it. This guy that we were told was a good guy when we were hearing information about regimes or governments that we were quite happy to fall, like in Tunisia. Okay, the government there, it's passed by them, we don't really care. That's fine. But when WikiLeaks started publishing information about Western war crimes, no. And very interesting point is the character assassination here. Traducing somebody's character is a key part of this imperialism today. I've had it done to me. I've been called a lot of things, many of them defamatory. George has suffered more probably than any political figure in Britain. Until Jeremy Corbyn came along and became leader of the Labour Party. Everything. You're a racist, you're anti-Semite, you're far right, you're far left, you're a Stalinist, you're a fascist, all in sometimes just the one article. You're a genocide, you're this. And so this is how it works. And the smear campaign against Julian Assange has been very interesting to analyse as a journalist, because I think Craig Murray made this very good point. Political correctness misused political correctness has played a part to try to prevent the left from coming to Julian's defence, to try to divide the left. And these charges of, which afterwards were never brought, correction, I'll correct myself, they were never brought, the charges regarding the Swedish case. The allegations, I should say, yes, thanks. These allegations were there. And for me, one of the key revelations, I was speaking to Alexander just earlier, were the leaked CPS, Crown Prosecution Service emails to the Swedish, to say to the Swedish prosecutors, don't you dare get cold feet. That was the actual statement. Don't you dare get cold feet and drop this case. Money isn't an object. And this is quite extraordinary. Anybody who doubts this is political, just think about this. If this man, who hadn't been connected to WikiLeaks, do we think the CPS will be sending emails to Sweden to say, don't you dare drop this case, don't get cold feet, money's no object? This has been a member of the public with no connection to politics, and this same scenario played out regarding these allegations. We wouldn't have got these emails, so that tells us clearly this is political. And once that's there, the allegations, as we said earlier, we're in this stage now where just to accuse somebody of something is taken as guilt. This is the terrible position we're in at the moment. I have a law degree. When I was studying law, it was innocent until proven guilty, presumption of innocence. That's gone out the window today. You only got to have somebody from the media saying this person's an anti-Semite, I think he is, and that's it. Condemned as an anti-Semite. That's happening with the Labour Party and a lot of people there. And the same with Julian. People have got to have allegations which haven't been brought charges, and that's enough. How can you defend this man? Well, actually, he hasn't been charged yet. Let alone being found guilty of this. Yet it's still meant to be a toxic allegation that is meant to try to push people away from supporting him. So that's... Yes, exactly, and that's where we're in today. We've got that, and that's a very unhappy development, that we've lost sight of this innocent until proven guilty, of the presumption of innocence all the way through. Just finally, just to wrap up, I just want to say that to end on a positive note, what we can do, what is to be done, to quote a famous Russian about 100 years ago, who got things done. What is to be done? Annie was saying, MPs, writing to the MPs. The one positive to take from this, what's happened to Julian, is that it's happening in a year when very likely, possibly the election. We've got Euro elections coming up, we've got local elections tomorrow. A lot of politicians have been very nervous now about their seats with the volatility of the British political situation, the Brexit party being formed, etc., etc. So these MPs, a lot of them will be vulnerable, will be thinking, oh my God, there could be elections soon. It's a very good time, as Emily said, if everybody in this room writes to their MP tomorrow, just emails their MP, what's your position on Julian Assange? Very interested to know. To let the MPs know that this matters to us. That's so important. And if you think, oh well, letters to MPs don't really matter, they just ignore it, I just want to end on one thought. Think back to, I think it was 2013, wasn't it, when we looked very much as if we were going to be bombing Syria at the behest of the US. In August 2013, there were allegations of chemical weapons attacks, the Syrian government, and we were building up. This was it, the Iraq war again. We have to do something, we've got to get involved, we've got to intervene. And MPs had an unprecedented meltdown then. There was incredible, the public mood was so against that. And I'm not saying that was the sole reason why the House of Commons and the Labour Party, in particular the Labour Party, unexpectedly voted against going to war, against airstrikes at that moment. Ed Miliband was the leader. Peter Oborne, my friend, the journalist, said that whatever you think about Ed Miliband, that was Labour Party voting against that was very, very important in the great scheme of things. And that, I think, was largely to do with a very big mailbag a lot of MPs got at that moment. So it can make a difference. We have to make our voices heard on this. And you knew it mattered because just the reaction from the neocon liberal interventionist lobby after that vote, the anger that there was. I remember reading pieces by Andrew Roberts, the historian. I think he said it was the most shameful moment in Parliament since Munich, since the appeasement. Nick Cohen was enraged. I mean, he always is, but he was even more angry that weekend about this failure to bomb. Ray McGovern, who was on the Crosstalk programme, said that he was in a TV studio with a couple of, I think it might have been Paul Wolfowitz, one of the couple of neocons in America, and they were so unhappy. It was as if a foul close family member died. It really hit the neocon war lobby hard, that failure to bomb, because they knew that was the key moment in the Syrian conflict. Had Britain bombed with the US at that moment, we could have had, Al Qaeda, ISIS in Damascus. Very different story how it happened, and that would have been another successful operation for the people we're talking about, the war lobby, the endless war lobby. And it was checked. Yes, it was an awful conflict, and nobody wants to deny that, but they didn't get their way in Syria. It was stopped. So it's not infallible. As our speaker earlier from WikiLeaks said, empires don't last forever. There comes a point where they go too far. You could say Aleppo was the Stalingrad of this empire. My friend John White and I both argued that. And so Julian Assange's case is political, and it is incredibly important, really, what happens from now in. So don't be disheartened by today's news. The fight is far from over. What's happened is an injustice when he is in prison while others who have committed incredible crimes are free. But if we stick together and if we campaign, we get behind George in his campaign in Peterborough, we all get behind that, and we get behind other MPs who take the same line. People like Chris Williamson has come out in favour in defence of Julian Assange. Get behind these people. We are they are communities.
I spoke in that debate in 2013. I commend it to you even now. It was an amazing debate. But there's no doubt at all that the public pressure against joining the all-out war against Syria made the difference. As the great English man of letters, Dr. Johnson, said, the knowledge that one is to be hanged in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully. And MPs are metaphorically hanged every 4 years or 5 years or nowadays every 2 years. And I can tell you, as a member of the House of Commons for almost 30 years, if you get 5 emails on the same subject from your constituents, your voters, especially if your majority is small, you note it. If you get 50, if you get 500, you're convening meetings with your staff to plan a response. So never underestimate the power of a public mobilized, even if it's just a letter. Even better if you go and see them. Never underestimate the importance of that. So if you're a member of Parliament, and I speak to the people in the hall, but the many thousands who are watching this live, make sure that you're a member of Parliament who doesn't know when they might be hanged. There might be a general election very much sooner than expected. We have to make the Assange issue a burning political issue throughout the land. And everyone in Parliament has to know that there is a political cost to their acquiescence, still more of their collaboration with the machinery seeking to extradite Julian to the dungeons of the United States. The next speaker, Alexander Mercors, is the editor of the excellent Duran magazine, and I welcome him to the microphone. Alexander.
What I will say today, I'd like to build a bit on what George was saying about this being essentially a political issue. Because, of course, what we're looking at the moment is what is supposed to be a legal process. And it's that legal process I'm going to discuss because I'm going to argue that this legal process is clearly, radically, essentially wrong. Now, since these charges that have been brought against Julian Assange originate from the United States, I'm going to do something unusual, and I think it'll be a bit dry, but I think it'll be informative. I'm going to quote to you what American lawyers are saying about this. This is because in any case which involves the United States, with a charge brought in the United States, it is American law that matters. Now, the key law, the law that is the fundamental law that governs the way journalism is supposed to be conducted in the United States and sets out the issue of freedom of the press is the First Amendment to the Constitution. And it reads as follows: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Now, the key words obviously are Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech and of the press. Now, the case everybody in the United States always refers to in any case involving the First Amendment is the Pentagon Papers case. The Pentagon Papers was a case which happened in 1971 when a whistleblower leaked, and from within the Pentagon, leaked a huge amount of papers that showed that US policy during the Vietnam War had been entirely intentional and calculated, that the story that the United States blundered into that war with good intentions was wrong, and he was able to prove it on the basis of the documentation that the Pentagon itself had produced and which he published through the New York Times. Now, the United States government attempted to prosecute the New York Times to prevent publication of the Pentagon Papers. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court of the United States said, no, you cannot stop publication of the Pentagon Papers because doing so is contrary to the First Amendment of the Constitution. Now, I'm going to just mention at this point what a particular American lawyer says about this in relation to the case which is now being brought against Julian Assange. This is an American lawyer, Alan Dershowitz, who I disagree with almost entirely on every political issue. But I do accept that he is an outstanding lawyer. I don't think I have any issue about this. Now, what he says is this. If the prosecutors were to charge Assange with espionage or any other crime for merely publishing the Manning material, this would be another Pentagon Papers case, i.e. a First Amendment case, with the same likely outcome. Many people have misunderstood the Action Supreme Court ruling in 1971. It did not say that the newspapers planning to publish the Pentagon Papers could not be prosecuted if they published classified material. It only said that they could not be restrained or stopped in advance from publishing them. Well, they did publish, and they were not prosecuted. Now, that is the view, not just of Alan Dershowitz, it was also the view of Barack Obama's Department of Justice. They looked into this very carefully, and they said, if we start prosecuting Julian Assange for publishing classified material as a journalist, that will fail because of the First Amendment defense that was used in the Pentagon Papers case, and if it were to succeed, which we don't think, then it might have an effect on freedom of speech and of the press generally. That was the view that Barack Obama's Department of Justice took. It is also the view, incidentally, of Rudy Giuliani, who is Donald Trump's personal lawyer, former mayor of New York, former federal prosecutor, and also someone who has represented Trump during the Mueller investigation. He has gone out publicly, and said the same thing. So, we're looking at a potential problem for the United States under the First Amendment if they go after Julian. Now, it's been mentioned here, there's been a discussion here about whether, in fact, Julian Assange has the right to this protection. People have said, well, he's not actually really a journalist, or he's not a real journalist. I want to state on record that I personally think that Julian Assange is a great journalist. But let's see what Alan Dershowitz has to say about that argument. This is a legal argument that he's making now. He says, prosecutors might try to distinguish the cases on the grounds that the New York Times is a more responsible outlet than WikiLeaks. But the First Amendment does not recognise degrees of responsibility. When the Constitution was written, our nation was plagued with irresponsible scandal sheets and broadsheets. No one described political pamphleteers, Tom Paine or James Callender, as responsible journalists of their day. Not only is that argument phony and a smear of Julian Assange, it has no basis in law. It should not be made. Anyone who makes it is speaking in bad faith. Now, the United States, the US government, the Department of Justice, Donald Trump's Department of Justice knows that they had a major problem bringing a case under the First Amendment. So they haven't done that. They've tried instead this extremely strange case in which they are basically accusing Julian Assange of engaging in a computer fraud with Chelsea Manning, Bradley Manning, as she was then, to try to get information, to extract information from the computer. Now, what does Dershowitz say about this case? The courts have ruled that journalists may not break the law in an effort to obtain material whose disclosure would be protected by the First Amendment. But the problem with the current effort, he means the case against Julian Assange, is that while it might be legally strong, it seems on the face of the indictment to be factually weak. It alleges that, quote, Assange encouraged Manning to provide information and records, unquote, from federal government agencies. That, quote, Manning provided Assange with part of a password, unquote, and that, quote, Assange requested more information, unquote. It goes on to say that Assange was, quote, trying to crack the password, but had no luck so far. So what does Dershowitz say? Not the strongest set of facts here. I would say that was an understatement. And in fact, Dershowitz goes on to say, the first question is whether a legal theory based on such inchoate facts will be sufficient for an extradition request. Now, I'm going to say something here which I'd like to touch on, which is that obviously the facts for this conspiracy are extremely weak on the face of the indictment. What is very concerning is that the United States government appears to be trying to get those facts make them look stronger by trying to get Julian Assange's alleged co-conspirator, Chelsea Manning, to testify against him. And the effect is that Chelsea Manning is now being held in what appears to be indefinite detention because she is refusing to provide evidence before a grand jury. I have to say that Chelsea Manning's courage and integrity fills me with awe. I have no hesitation in saying that I consider her heroic. Anyway, so do we really want to extradite Julian Assange to a country where people are held in indefinite detention in order to get them to testify against each other? Obviously. Now, what did Julian Assange actually do? Why did he do it? Well, I'm now going to turn to another American lawyer, one who I tend to agree with rather more, who is Ben Greenwald. Now, Greenwald is important because he's not just a lawyer and a very fine lawyer, he's also a journalist, so he understands journalism very well, and he has a very strong interest in these sort of cases because they affect his own practice and work as a journalist. So, what does Greenwald say? He says the following: the key fact being widely misreported is that the indictment accuses Assange of trying to help Manning obtain access to document databases to which she had no valid access, i.e. hacking rather than journalism. But the indictment alleges no such thing. Rather, it simply accuses Assange of trying to help Manning log into the Defense Department's computers using a different username so that she could maintain her anonymity while downloading documents in the public interest and then furnish them to WikiLeaks to publish. In other words, the indictment seeks to criminalise what journalists are not only permitted but ethically required to do. Take steps to help their sources maintain their anonymity. We've heard earlier today from Annie Manning how important it is for journalists to protect their sources if whistleblowers are actually to be able to do their job properly. This is a very dangerous indictment. It goes to the root of what journalists do. It is intended to make the whole process of journalistic investigation all but impossible, especially when it concerns secrets, the most important secrets that governments in the United States and elsewhere want to keep hidden. Now, it gets even worse about this case, because something which I've never seen anybody mention except one person, and that is that this case against Julian Assange is actually brought out of time. Now, what I mean by that is that there is a statute of limitation in the United States which says that cases of this sort should be brought within 5 years. Now, what happened, whatever it was that Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning were doing together, they did in 2010. We're now in 2019. The indictment against them dates from, I believe, 2017. In fact, it's almost 8 years later. So, I'm now going to turn to another American lawyer. This is Andrew McCarthy, a federal prosecutor, a man who is deeply, deeply hostile to Julian Assange, a man of very conservative views, someone I again don't agree with on most issues, but who is nonetheless an outstanding lawyer. What does he say about the limitation issue? He says, how is the Justice Department able to prosecute Assange on an indictment filed 3 years after the prescribed limitation period? It appears that the Justice Department is relying on an exception in section 2332B of the Penal Code that extends the statute of limitations to 8 years for, quote, acts of terrorism transcending national boundaries, unquote. Now, Andrew McCarthy then goes on to say this. I repeat, this is someone who's very hostile to Julian Assange. Now, conspiracy to commit computer fraud is a very serious offence, and Assange is at the top of the serious range. And there's no doubt that the conspiracy transcended national boundaries. Assange was outside the United States when he collaborated with Manning. But is it really an act of terrorism? Now, Andrew McCarthy goes into a long, erudite discussion about this issue. And if you want to read his article, it's on National Review. He thinks the US government may have an argument case because the word terrorism is so broadly defined in US law. I've looked at these arguments. I'm going to say straightforwardly, I don't agree. Besides, what does Andrew McCarthy say? It will be a hotly contested issue. Well, yes. And he goes on to say, if the Justice Department is going to succeed in prosecuting Assange, it is going to have to win the statute of limitation argument twice, in Britain and in Virginia. That's not going to be a layup, to say the least. Well, certainly not. So we have, what to all appearances, an extraordinary flimsy case here. We have no real case, it would seem, on the First Amendment, on the Espionage Act. So that's why it's not been brought. And we have this cobbled together case that's actually been brought based upon an allegation of conspiracy in which the co-conspirator is not being prosecuted and in which, as a result, she finds herself in indefinite detention. How does our government, how do our courts extradite on the basis of all this nonsense? Well, I have to say, I would have said, in any proper system of law, they wouldn't extradite. But let's look at what the story of Julian Assange has been. Firstly, he was, as we know, sentenced today to 50 weeks in prison. This is in connection with skipping bail in a case, and it's absolutely correct to say it's a case which originated allegations of sexual misconduct in Sweden. Julian Assange gave answers to the Swedish investigators in Sweden. He then gave answers again to the Swedish investigators in the Ecuador embassy when they interviewed him there. There is a statement which he published which deals with those allegations in great detail, which has been published, I believe, on the internet, and it may still be there for all I know. The Swedes got all this information from Julian Assange. They never brought charges against him. They are now coming under extraordinary political pressure to bring charges against him, which, by the way, I find extremely disturbing, but we'll put that to one side. Let me repeat, he has been sentenced for 50 weeks in prison for skipping bail in a case which was never brought, which doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Now, given that that is so, how can any of us feel confident about the legal processes in this case? We have an extraordinary case in the United States, which, as we've seen, prominent American lawyers are extremely skeptical about. We've seen an extraordinary case against him here in Britain. We heard the judge today pay no attention at all to any of the points that Julian Assange's counsel put to her and giving the maximum sentence. I think somebody, one of our earlier speakers said, this doesn't feel right. It isn't right. That's why it doesn't feel right. This case is not going to be won in the courts. It's going to be won in places like this by people like us, people coming here, protesting, speaking out, pointing out how wrong this is, how abysmally this man is being treated in, by our courts, by our legal system, by the authorities. And we must renew the political struggle to defend him. This frightful machine that has been unleashed upon him for publishing things which have always been true and which it is in our interests to know is a frightful machine which is ultimately going to attack all of us. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for being here.
That's Mr. Peter Ford, who was just moving out.
and who are no different from those in the establishment and who are censoring our voices and that of alternative media outlets. So before calling our next speaker, I'd like to say that without two of the speakers here tonight, Imperialism on Trial events would never have taken place. Firstly, I attended the Stop Wars Media on Trial event 2 years ago, and I thought I really want to put something like this on my hometown in Derry in the north of Ireland. And that's Sheila Coombs from Stop War. Then I had the task of trying to get it somehow funded or interest in Derry, and there was no takers, unfortunately. But I met George Galloway, who spoke at an event in Derry nearly 2 years ago, and he passed on my proposal to RT, and RT, thankfully, have supported and live streamed. This is the 5th event now that they've live streamed for Imperialism on Trial. So I'd also like to thank George and to Russia Today. Thank you. So I invite Sheila Coombs from Stop War as our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. Imperialism on Trial is a fantastic progression from the Media on Trial events that we did. So thanks very much to Greg for picking up the baton, going on, putting so much energy into all the events that he's done and getting so many excellent speakers. Right, I'd like to talk about WikiLeaks with you in terms of how they've helped the anti-war community. It's not just the collateral murder video, and it's not just the 90,000 documented incidents in the Afghan war log that thrown a light on the brutality of the wars in the 21st century. But it's also the machinations exposed in the emails, the machinations of people in the State Department and their allies internationally, to bring about war and deadly regime change. One such of these Machiavellian emails is this one. This is just the header from the email. It was written by Sir William Roebuck in 2006. He was the US ambassador to Damascus. He's writing in this email, he's putting forward lots of suggestions as to how he could, as he puts it, throw Assad off balance. He's got lots of Machiavellian schemes about how to undermine the Assad regime, including he states that they ought to stress Iranian influence in Syria, hoping to sort of engender a sectarian divide, which is a typical imperialist tactic. I'm talking about imperialism on trial. He was advocating this old, it's actually a British imperial, from the British Empire, divide and conquer, create a sectarian divide. So this email goes on, it's quite lengthy, he's got all of these schemes which he's trying to impress people with. That was 2006. What I also particularly note about this email, which I find it's very useful that WikiLeaks has exposed this, is the recipient list. The recipients are the State Department, Department of Treasury, Israel, Tel Aviv, the National Security Council, that's understandable, Secretary of State, that's understandable, the League of Arab States, supposedly understandable, US mission to the European Union in Brussels, the United Nations. Now that's what really resonated with me. The United Nations knew about this email in 2006, in which Roebuck was planning all of these schemes to destabilise the Syrian government. As I said, he uses the words thrown Assad off balance. So that was 2006. So first of all, why didn't an organisation that was set up to be an honest arbiter in international relations, with international law at its core, the United Nations, why didn't they pick this up as preparations for war? Why didn't they flag this up? Even worse, 5 years later, when some of these mechanisms he was suggesting were being put into play, why didn't the United Nations say, oh, come on, you know, there's something wrong here, you know, so there's some sort of nasty business going on. They didn't do that. Instead, they very much went along with the rhetoric of peaceful protesters being searching, you know, wanting democracy and freedom, being repressed by a brutal dictator. So they went along with that, and even the Syrian ambassador to the UN, which is Bashar Jafari, he was excluded from UN sessions which were discussing events in his own country. I mean, I find that really quite despicable. So I think we have to thank WikiLeaks not only for exposing the emails and the thoughts of the bad guys, but also exposing the collusion of some of the good guys. And we like to think the UN is a good guy, but I think they've colluded here. So thanks to WikiLeaks for that. But reading through this book, which was what my husband bought me this for my birthday a few years ago, the WikiLeaks files, we can see that many of the machinations for regime change coincide with the targets of the Washington neocons. So if you look at the various regime changes that this book deals with, they've been stated quite openly by the Washington neocons. They make no secret about it. Leading neocons like Richard Pearl, Michael Dean, John Bolton, William Crystal, and others openly stated that they wanted to see regime change in Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran. Sorry? Sorry? Yes, that's right. Yes, they wanted to see regime change in Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, and North Korea. So it wasn't a surprise. It was known. It was out there. But again, when these things started to happen, nobody in the media, in the international, in government said, oh, look, you know, that's a bit strange that we're seeing this list played out in the 21st century, exactly as prescribed by the Washington neocons. If you want to understand who the Washington neocons are, or neoconservatives is the full name, I really recommend that you watch a BBC panoramic programme from 2003 called The War Party. It's practically unheard of for me to recommend anything from BBC, but that is an excellent documentary. And it speaks to people in 2003, it actually interviews the neoconservatives in Washington. They have an ideology, they say, of spreading democracy and freedom. But that particularly in the Middle East, but that democracy and freedom has killed so many people, and it's been rolled out again and again and again. And it's those two tenets, democracy and freedom, have basically become weaponized in the 21st century. So, as I say, I am shocked that the international community haven't sort of related these regime change to this group of people. And if we're talking about imperialism on trial, I think that the neocons are central to imperialist moves. So not only did we have the countries in the Middle East that have been subjected to these regime changes, but Venezuela's been on their list. And of course Venezuela is in the news at the moment with the key neocon John Bolton right at the front. Then obviously Putin's Russia is very much in their sights. To that end we saw Victoria Nuland, wife of Robert Kagan, an arch-neocon. She was responsible for orchestrating the 2014 coup in Ukraine. That coup removed a democratically elected leader and destabilised a country right on Russia's border. There was a lot of intent in that. So we find that the Washington neocons seem to sort of be able to manoeuvre to sort of various different political factions. First of all, they started off with the Washington neocons, started off with Republicans, the US Republicans, with Bush and Blair's New Labour in England. They affected the Iraq War with that relationship. But later, they moved to US Democrats who have the who tap humanitarian interventionism and Hillary Clinton's responsibility to protect. These were two very useful mechanisms to put regime changes in power in place, make out that they were humanitarian interventions, or that their responsibility to protect. It went away from the Republicans, which people were seeing more as very much, warmongering and on the right, and it softened the whole thing to looking as if it was, wanting a sense to protect the citizens and all this sort of thing. So Hillary was a key driver in the Libya intervention. Although the media, aligned media, very much made out that it was Britain and France that was spearheading it, but actually it was Hillary who was driving it. WikiLeaks released 30,000 of her emails off her private server. 17,000 of those referred to Libya. She has emails headed TikTok to Libya, and they detail strategies. It's sort of a counting down of strategies of how to undermine Gaddafi's Libya. So it's no wonder that when she heard of his brutal murder, she cackled and said, "We came, we saw, he died." Yeah, disgusting, absolutely disgusting. And as far as she was concerned, it was a job well done. But Hillary, of late, has overextended herself, I'm very happy to say. Her lies with regard to the Russiagate conspiracy theory are unravelling. Her DNC's malfeasance in undermining her running mate, a Democratic Party running mate, Bernie Sanders, at the primaries, was exposed in leaked, not hacked, but leaked emails. Her childish deflection from the expose of her and her DNC crimes was her contention that, Russia did it. So this was very dangerous and led US politicians and aligned media to frame the supposed Russian hacking of her emails as an act of war. So she, rather than the mainstream media and analysts looking at the content of the emails and exposing the malfeasance of what her DNC and she had done in the emails, like a child, she just said, Russia did it, and they all turned to, okay, Russia did it. It's so simplistic, infantile, stupid. That's what we've come down to in today's political world. But what I think is that couldn't we logically assume that a DNC member who'd wanted Bernie Sanders to be Democratic presidential candidate and had perhaps witnessed some of the machinations of Hillary and her DNC team to undermine him, couldn't we assume that perhaps that disgruntled person might have downloaded the emails on site and passed them to a WikiLeaks contact, and that it was nothing to do with any Russian hacking at all? I think that's probably quite a lot more. But as I say, Hillary's deceit in claiming Russia did it has been very dangerous. It has been cited as an act of war, and it's pitted two nuclear superpowers against each other. And a mainstream media has wholly colluded in this, trumpeting her claim. So Hillary and her media chums stand to lose an awful lot should Julian Assange reveal the source of the emails to WikiLeaks. And Assange quite clearly states it wasn't Russia.
Seth Rich got killed for it, didn't he?
Yeah. Sorry?
Seth Rich got killed. Seth
Yes,
Rich has since
yes.
been killed, yeah.
Well, that's another subject.
Pizzagate. Hashtag Pizzagate.
Yeah. We've got to note as well that the level of desperation of the mainstream media in the last few weeks, with their smears one after another brought out on Assange, and since he's been arrested. And I think that's because they're worried and they're running scared and they're doubling down on their vilification of him. So you may think that I'm homing in on poor old Hillary quite a bit, which I am. But she is just as a legitimate target as Bush or Blair. Her lies with regard to Russian meddling were potentially as dangerous as theirs with regard to Iraq's WMDs. We have to thank Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for the near decade of work it has undertaken to give transparency to the machinations for preemptive wars of intervention and regime change. Journalist or not, publisher or not, Julian Assange is a truth teller, and we need Julian Assange.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Our final speaker for the evening is another redoubtable campaigner, journalist, publisher, Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire.
First of all, I want to thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Don't be fooled by the numbers in this room. This represents a much bigger group that's out there, and it's not just in this country, it's international. And I think everybody who follows social media and who interacts with people, as Emmy testified to, know what I'm talking about. This is a global issue, and I'm going to explain why. So, why am I here? Why are we here? This is a fundamental issue, and I've been trying to put this in a way that people can understand. So I hope that what I can give you is some boiled down explanations that you can take tonight, because you're going to be talking to people. This is how this issue is going to spread. This is how, if you really want to win this, which could be, in a lot of people's estimation, certainly if you're a journalist or you're a publisher, if you're a news consumer, this is the defining issue of this generation. And if you think about, from the beginning of the printing press, from the days of Gutenberg till now, think about post-Enlightenment democratic society. Think of all the trials and tribulations that we've had to go through in this country, in Europe, in the United States, in North America, all around the world, just to achieve some fundamental rights, some constitutional rights, some protections for whistleblowers, for instance, for the press, that they might publish and be damned, but still they'll publish. Think about all the blood that's been shed for that. It's not unlike the fight of the suffragettes, or the winning the right to vote, which not everybody takes advantage of, despite how many people sacrificed for those rights. So this issue affects everybody. When you go away tonight and you talk to people about what these speakers said at this event that I went to in London, you have to make it clear to everybody you speak to that this affects everybody. This doesn't just affect the press, the papers, the titles that you love, the ones that I used to read, look forward to reading every weekend when I have my stack. To read The Independent, The Guardian, The Times, The Sunday Times, The Mail, whatever. But you understand, now it's every journalist, every publication, every blogger, everybody who uses social media. And I make this point to people, there's people doing forensic document analysis on Twitter. They're just ordinary enthusiasts, citizens. They're publishing, they're journalists. The amount of journalists on the planet has mushroomed. So this issue affects everybody. It affects absolutely everybody. This is fundamental, okay? Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning are holding the line on one of the most important pillars of a post-Enlightenment democratic society. Understand that's what's happening, okay? That's what you have to get people to understand. You yourselves have to understand that first, okay? And let me tell you, when governments take power or take rights away from citizens, they don't give them back very easily. Short of, a French Revolution scenario. And I don't want to see that happen. Of course, nobody does. But that's a very difficult path for society to tread down, okay? So this is not trivial. When I look in the mainstream media, I look at the journalists, I look at the people who should be covering this, I look at the Guardian who milked WikiLeaks for all the street cred it was worth, and Edward Snowden. And I look at some of the pieces of fiction that they've published over the last couple of years, especially pertaining to this case and also to Julian Assange. And it's unbelievable. Not that they would call themselves journalists, but that they themselves don't see the danger in letting this one slide. And we've had the editor of WikiLeaks here tonight, and he's very worried, and so he should be, and so should everybody. The norms, what do our leaders call it? The rules-based international order. Okay, they even got an acronym for it now. It's RBIS system, rules-based international system. Okay, what rules-based international system? Making it up as you go along. That is the rules-based international system. It's a Hobbesian state of nature where might makes right. And this is what the editor of WikiLeaks was lamenting, and I could hear it in his voice. All of the things that we believed in, that everybody worked towards, dissipating, dissolving right before our eyes. This case is a touchstone on this issue. So understand that Julian Assange is the publisher, like any publisher. And Chelsea Manning is the source. Those two things make a story. You lose one, you lose the other. Or at least you lose the purpose of the other, the publisher, okay? This is so important. Now, that's the fourth estate. And right now, there's a lot of people who don't even know what the fourth estate is anymore, who don't care what the fourth estate is, and most of the people are people working in what they think are the fourth estate. So, I could give you if we talk about fake news stories in the mainstream media, I could give you a list as long as my arm for every single individual publication just in the last 12 months, okay? But what we have is a system, a state that doesn't believe that it should be held accountable by anybody. And you have to remember, and Alexander pointed this out very clearly, in the United States, we have freedom of the press, protection of the press. These are things that are mentioned in the Constitution in the United States. So, you lose this, you lose everything. This is how fundamentally important it is. So the system believes that it itself should be supervising itself. that only it is best suited to regulate itself, to hold itself accountable. What sort of system is that, I ask? Okay, I think we know the answer to that. We saw it in the mid-20th century, breaking out in Europe. Okay, corporativism, the term equated with fascism, made famous by Giovanni Gentile, an Italian philosopher, but attributed to Benito Mussolini often. That's the system that we're looking at now. A corporatist state that is not accountable to anybody. Corporations are not accountable. Full stop. Anybody who's tried customer service for any big company can attest to that most of the time. But that's what government's becoming like. You go to court, corporation has 100 lawyers. You have maybe a public defender. This is what the pharmaceutical industry behaves like. It investigates itself. It regulates itself. So we'll do the clinical trials ourselves. Don't worry, we'll report to you about how we did. Don't worry, it's great. This is the system that's been ushered in the United States now for almost 20 years. So the government doesn't want a fourth estate. The case of Julian Assange makes that clear. And just imagine, how many of you have seen the collateral murder video, the WikiLeaks release in 2010? I just watched it for the first time in like 8 years. I rewatched it last year. And I looked at this, and I just couldn't believe what I was watching, you know? And you walk into a shopping mall in America, and you gun down 14 people, the whole country goes into crisis mode. CNN scrambles 100 reporters and sound stages within 12 hours. Every network's down there. It's the horror of horrors, a mass shooting in America, okay? We watched a mass shooting on that video. Not only that, members of the press gunned down. But if you're a member of the military, no charges brought, maybe a slap on the wrist. And if that, it'll be on the lowest ranking officer or soldier, you can guarantee that. When in fact, Donald Rumsfeld himself and Craig Murray would attest to this, his name's on the order for enhanced interrogation. They're just following orders. But they'll string up a low-level private, or a corporal, or Chelsea Manning, in that sense. So, the other thing is understand that this is fundamentally a technology issue as well. This is a jurisdiction issue. WikiLeaks is, in its purest form, if you could take a 21st century media outlet and say, this is an archetypal 21st century media outlet, no print, totally digital, international, decentralized, that's WikiLeaks. It doesn't do commentary, doesn't do television interviews or podcasts. It just gets information, it vets it, it collates it, it curates it, does a little bit of formatting, and then it publishes it. And that's an invaluable service for the media. The rest of the press globally should be looking at this and saying, what a fantastic resource WikiLeaks is. They do the hard work for us. They do the heavy lifting for us. All we have to do is report on it, okay? And pull out the nuggets of interest in there that are relevant to our political situation, as Sheila demonstrated a couple of those nuggets in a very thick book. Okay, that's how valuable WikiLeaks is. Now, I just want to make a comment on Julian Assange. We talked about the character assassination of Assange. So I was at Belmarsh prison with a lot of people who are here today, protesting and also showing our support for Julian Assange just last week, 2 weeks ago. Now, the morning of that protest, the night before, I got a call from my colleague behind me, and she said, will you go on LBC radio and do an interview about Assange? And I said, well, she said, it's a maybe. So she said, I think George Galloway was meant to do that interview, so I volunteered to, he couldn't make it, so I volunteered to stand in. So I can say that I'm George Galloway's stunt double for LBC. Andrew Castle was the host, okay? Nice guy, nice guy. They did a pre-interview the day before, asked me questions. They weren't even listening to my answers, quite frankly. Anyway, the show starts, and I knew that all of the questions they asked me in the pre-interview, they weren't going to ask me any of those questions on the interview. So as soon as the interview started, Andrew Castle started laying into this issue of Julian Assange as a sex criminal, and the issue of Sweden and reviving this case. Okay. Nothing about the issue of freedom of the press, nothing about one of the fundamental pillars of our society internationally, none of that. Just about Julian Assange's sexual exploits in Sweden and should he be extradited. So I took a few minutes to lay out the facts of the case to Andrew Castle, and he was a bit surprised. He even admitted he didn't know much about the case. He thanked me. But then I asked him a question that threw him back a little bit. And I said, Andrew, and this was live on air. By the way, we've asked for this clip and they won't give it to us. Okay. So I said, Andrew, do you consider, and he's a very nice, very polite, very nice host. I said, do you consider Julian Assange a colleague or not? Do you consider a journalistic colleague? Do you consider WikiLeaks a media outlet or not? And it's just pause. Okay? So that's the fundamental question here. Okay? And I say this many other times. Government will do what government does. Politicians will do what politicians do. How many people expect that politicians are going to always tell the truth? Okay. I like your positive attitude. They're going to do what they're going to do. That's why we need an independent fourth estate. That's why we need a free press to hold them to account when they don't tell the truth, when they are lying, when they are covering up, when there are crimes. What Chelsea Manning, what Julian Assange are leaking, you have to understand there's lives at stake. So even if there are lives at stake, that's illegal, that's forbidden. The full weight of the state's going to come down on you, not just one state, 2 or 3 states, for exposing war crimes, you could potentially save lives. Instead, we have the state pointing its apparatus directly at anybody who dares to embarrass the United States government or military, okay? And that's the jurisdiction issue. This is about full global jurisdiction, okay? The technology has introduced a fundamental problem, and we all know what our constitutional rights are, we know what our history is, but we don't know how to deal with this going forward. Certainly the government doesn't. They're panicking. They're in reactionary mode. You can see it now. The norms are falling to the wayside. They do not have the coolness or the level-headedness to sit down. Quite frankly, they don't have the expertise. Okay? In terms of technology, most of these people that I've spoke to or heard talk, they're out to lunch. I've seen the talks at Davos and the various other forums, and a lot of people are completely out to lunch. Ministers of digital culture and whatever, okay? They can just about use their email and send out a few tweets, and even then, it's haphazard. So the people maybe sitting behind me, this panel, has more knowledge and more insight in this issue, possibly, than the decision makers in government. And the people I'm facing right now in the audience, some of you, I would put probably in that category as well. You understand the nature of media. You understand the nature of the internet, social media, because you've been using it. You've been on the front lines. You've been in the forums. You've been in the chat rooms for 20 or 30 years, some of you. You've been blogging. Our political leaders haven't. They've been told about blogs, what they should know about blogs and what they should say about blogs, and they stand in public. So that's basically the message. This is I could go into a lot of other issues, but this affects everybody. So my message is simple. The message that you need to take away tonight is simple, okay? This is for everybody. And if you think the odds are stacked against you, understand that how things change is when one person gets up and says, no, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to accept that. And as with the letters flooding to the MPs is one example, but you have to physically stand up and say no, and you have to put yourself in between the aggressor and the person who's being oppressed in this case, who's representing the interests of everybody here and outside these doors. That is the most important concept, and I hope everybody can take that on board and spread that to as many people as you can. Get people aware of this issue. Get people to understand how important and fundamental it is.
Reiterate Pizzagate, Pedogate. Please reiterate that.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Before George concludes tonight's event, could I just say one or two things here? Emily has asked me here that she'll be available in the foyer or outside the venue afterwards if you would like to meet with her, and she would like emails about solidarity actions and letter writing campaigns, etc. Could I also say to our online viewers and to those of you in the audience as well, that we'll be meeting tomorrow at Westminster Magistrates Court for the hearing of Julian Assange on the extradition charges. That's 9 o'clock. We'll be meeting, and it's at 10 o'clock that the court proceedings start. The nearest tube station is Edgware Road or Marylebone Station. So I'll hand you over now to George to conclude.
Thank you very much, for all the tremendous effort that you and your friends have put into the organizing of this incredible meeting this evening. Not just a vibrant audience here in London, but you, the thousands, tens of thousands actually, who have been watching these proceedings live on that wonderful invention, Patrick, the internet. In precisely the year, that a Russian gentleman, to quote my good friend Neil Clark, asked the question, what is to be done? A man called Hobbes wrote a book on imperialism. It has been in print since 1902. It is on every university reading list. It has been quoted approvingly by no less than Mr. Blair himself, by Gordon Brown, 2 British Prime Ministers. It has been quoted approvingly even in The Guardian. And yet, because 8 years ago, Jeremy Corbyn wrote a small comment, a blurb, see this film, read this book, which said, this is quite a good book actually, although it was controversial in parts at the time, no less than the London Times, formerly the paper of record, now another sewer of neocon propaganda, a cell actually of neocon propaganda, led with it on its front page that Jeremy Corbyn had endorsed a book which contained within its hundreds of thousands of words some casual racism, although they were only concerned about one particular casual racism. They weren't concerned that the author described the colonial peoples as lesser races. That's what he said in the book. they're not interested in that one, but his casual racism, an entirely unfounded casual racism about the banking and finance industry, has got Corbyn in the midst of another anti-Semitism storm. With local elections tomorrow, who'd have thunk it? The reason I mention it is this. We have tonight, I believe, certainly for the people watching around the world, slain the slander of Julian Assange. Whether his activities in Sweden, his attitude towards cats, his personal hygiene. Is there any sentient being who hasn't smelt a rat that as soon as Jeremy Corbyn became a threat to the British establishment, it was discovered that he was an anti-Semite? As soon as Julian Assange was no longer the flavour of the month, all kinds of things were discovered about him. These hypocrites are not, I promise you, because I know them. I've known them for well over 30 years. These are not deluded, these journalists. They have not lost their way like some lost sheep. Journalism in what is laughingly called the mainstream media now is no more than a battalion of state power in Britain and in the United States. That is why 21st century wire, that is why the canary, that is why the squat box, that is why WikiLeaks. Because nature abhors a vacuum. And these people, with their criminal malfeasance, have created a vacuum. Of course, from time to time, though it's been a while, some nobility emerges. And let me give you just one example. When the Daily Telegraph was offered stolen property, that property being the details of the grand larceny of public funds in the MP's expenses scandal, which revealed that hundreds of members of Parliament, some of them the biggest names in the land, excluding me, of course, how disappointed were they when they discovered I wasn't on any of these lists. Some of the biggest names in the land, hundreds of members of Parliament, had been stealing from the public purse in false, in some cases forged, expenses claims. The Telegraph had no compunction about publishing this stolen information, whose provenance was theft. And rightly so. They were hailed, they won journalism awards, and rightly so. Their circulation boomed, and rightly so, because what they were revealing was much more important than the original act of theft which had made these publications possible. That's all that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks have done. On a grander scale, they have revealed not just, important as it is, the grubby thievery of our parliamentarians. They revealed war crimes crimes. Now look, when I'm dead, if you cut me open, the word Iraq will run through me like the word Blackpool in a stick of rock. And I am with Julian Assange until the end. Because of his revelation of more crimes committed in Iraq. He's gone now. I've told you, as long as God gives me breath, I will pursue you until the ends of the earth. Allow you in this life to escape the trial you face on the judgment day also. Now, some of you won't agree with this, but as I have watched over recent decades our institutions, one after the other, failing us, our police, our fourth estate, our parliamentarians, our governments, as I have watched them all before my eyes fail us, I maintain that the least compromise, that's all I'm saying, the least compromise is the British judiciary. It is the least corrupted. It is the least compromised. It is the one that has retained some semblance of its independence from the political power. I tell you something. Let me finish then. I ran a campaign more than 20 years ago to save what would have been the life, and certainly the liberty, of the leader in London of the Saudi Arabian opposition, Professor Mohammed al-Masri. The arms companies in Britain had pressed the then Home Secretary Michael Howard to deport the professor to Dominica, where he would have been the only Muslim on the island and where the staple diet was pork. Michael Howard issued a deportation order, having had his orders from British Aerospace and the British military-industrial complex, which stood to lose untold billions in arms sales if this man was able to continue raining down fire and brimstone on the corruption in Saudi Arabia. Nobody gave our chances a fig. But I was always confident. And in front of the noble Judge Pearl, a Jewish judge, when some of them in the campaign discovered we had a Jewish judge, they were dismayed. I told them, this is the best judge we can have, because this man will be determined to be honest and fair and just in this case. And so he was. Not only is al-Masri still here today, but the man, Judge Pearl, administered what I called at the time a judicial caning of Michael Howard, left him without a name, and overturned the government. Now, the one today is a lower order apparatchik. She's a lower order apparatchik. What I'm saying is, yes, we need to politically mobilize. Yes, we need public opinion. But I also believe, and I implore our judiciary to stand up for what they are supposed to be, the custodians of justice in our land. And I believe that our lawyers, who are the best lawyers in England, will make a case that any fair judge will have to listen to. And I beg them to do so, to listen fairly and justly to the case that we are making. Double jeopardy, statutes of limitations, the balance of good versus bad, the balance of the public's interest. If our courts are to be worthy of the name, the courts of justice, they will stop this extradition. And if they don't, then we'll do the same all over again in the United States of America, with the best lawyers in America on our side. So I thank you for coming to what I think we will look back on as an historic meeting here this evening. Thank you very much indeed.
How do you find the guilty, Imperialism and its lackey mainstream media? Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty! Are you a Freemason?